I want to go back to something that I think is crucial to understanding why a lot of Americans don't think about privacy. And I think it does have to do something with privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't tease that out enough. There is this prevailing notion that, well, I have nothing to hide. You can go through my statements if you want.
Right.
I get that a lot, but people tend to not recognize that as a privilege because there are tons of communities here in the US that don't have the privilege of moving through space with little regard to hypersurveillance.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And with that, I think that that's a cultural reason why there haven't been more conversations around privacy and Web3.
Welcome to Tech Intersect. I'm your host, Tanya Evans, and my life and work exist at the heart of law, business, and technology. Yeah, I've earned a few fancy titles and degrees over the years, but the bottom line is I'm a writer, speaker, teacher, and lifelong learner, and I'm really excited that you've joined me on this journey. So what is Tech Intersect? Well, it's authentic, empowering conversations with really interesting guests who demystify complex topics to prepare you for the future, because your future is now. And it exists where law, business, and tech intersect. Get ready to listen, learn, and leverage. Let's get started. Hey, everybody. Before we get started, I have two important opportunities to share with my favorite listeners, that's you, that start in January of 2023. Yes, it is right around the corner, and I want us to start in an engaging and empowering way. First, I'm planning my very first in-person summit in January, so that's January 27th to 29th in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Basically, in speaking with club members and Advantage Evans students and alums, we've determined that what we all need right now is a reset, a reboot, an opportunity to reconnect with the course content and also with each other, especially in this bear market. So I've decided to teach my entire From Cash to Crypto Encore course content in a small group of highly motivated folks in one beautiful, sun-soaked weekend. If this sounds like something you'd be interested in, act now to secure your seat. We're already about a third of the way full. The link is in the show notes. Let's go from cash to crypto together. Sun, surf, sand, and Satoshis? Listen, that sounds like a win to me. And two, here's an opportunity to stop leaving money on the table. And as my dear friend and millionaire maker, Rachel Rodgers says in her book, We Should All Be Millionaires, start making money moves today. So Rachel and her company Hello7 are presenting the Make Money Moves Challenge, where you discover the unexpected money generating strategies that produce the results you have been dreaming of. I've gone through it before. I'm going to do it again. I want you to join me during this 5-day challenge. Learn how to do what Rachel calls money generating activities. And these are simple, powerful, and effective action steps that bring money in the door ASAPidly, like right now. Instead of wasting 40 hours a week doing busy work that doesn't even produce revenue, shift gears and spend 5 to 10 hours a week making money moves. Learn how to make money faster, more efficiently, and on demand, no matter what is happening in the economy, up, down, sideways. Listen, it won't matter. Join me and Rachel and Hello7 as we make money moves together in this challenge with the link in the show notes. Let's get this money, y'all. And if you're ready to grow, let's go. Okay, time to listen, learn, and leverage. Let's get started. In this episode of Tech Intersect, I am so excited to welcome Gabrielle Hibbert to the show. She's the Security and Privacy Fellow for the Decentralized Future Council. And she started her career in public policy after working across both Capitol Hill and various nonprofit and consultant agencies in the DMV area, as I used to say when I lived in the district. And I invited her on the show to talk about how to ensure government regulation, and we know that it's coming, is sensible as it relates to the broader crypto and blockchain ecosystem, but also inclusive, and how we make sure privacy is at the center of the decentralized web and policy initiatives. And also a common theme here on Tech Intersect, how we can avoid the mistakes of Web 2 and make, both through policy and legislation, making Web 3 equalizing, leveling the playing field, making it an inclusive space for all. It's a tall order, but if ever there's been a chance in this moment, given the push for a decentralized web, it's now. We will talk about all of that and more in a moment. But first, Gabrielle, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I am, again, super excited to talk about topics that are most near and dear to my heart. And yeah.
I'm really happy that we have this chance. It's the first, but it certainly will not be the last, because your background, experience, and your passion is so clear, and the work that you're working on is so important. And what I found after doing this show for 2 years, not a lot of people can have this discussion. I have people who can talk the regs and the legislation and policy initiatives and the technology and the future of work and wealth and creativity. But I believe it's all for naught if we aren't centering and empowering those who are systemically marginalized, right? So if we can't do that, then we're just replicating Web 2. And I know you're as passionate about that as I am, so I'm more excited than you. I know you don't believe it, but it's actually true. But before we jump into the heart and the meat of what we hope to speak about, talk about your background and even what led you to do the work that you're doing currently.
Yeah, definitely. I love talking about this because it really shows how full circle your career can really be. As you mentioned, I started off my career on Capitol Hill. I worked for Senator Mark Warner, and I really loved connecting with communities and people through policy. After a couple years of doing a little bit of the advocacy work, I moved on to various nonprofits and NGOs, which again was an extension of that advocacy work and community building that I really enjoyed on the Hill. After that, I wanted to get my master's, which I did at Brandeis University, focusing on social policy and development. And I have this thing that I tell myself before I go on any sort of educational or kind of social journey. I tell myself, try something new. And the first semester of my grad school year, I decided to take a course called Blockchain and International Development.
Nice.
At the time, I was like, what do these two things have in common? This was a couple of years after my undergraduate roommates were mining Bitcoin in their dorm.
Nice.
so I had that as as the point at which I was bringing in a lot of my reference to blockchain, but I had known nothing else outside of that. And after taking that course, I realized that there were tons of similarities between blockchain development and policy development. And right then and there, I decided to pivot my studies from being purely policy focused to more development and tech focused within the policy realm. So I took a little bit of courses in computer science while also focusing on Ethereum and smart contract development. And from there, I've been trying to both do the work of educating policymakers and people within the advocacy space around decentralized technologies, while also bringing the policy realm to the tech space, as they're kind of siloed at the moment, which is causing a lot of friction which we are now seeing come to life right now.
You love listening to podcasts, but have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? Maybe you want to build a brand, grow your business, or are looking for an excuse to talk about your favorite hobby. Whatever your reason for making a podcast, Buzzsprout is the place to start. Since 2009, Buzzsprout has helped over 300,000 people launch their own podcasts. Buzzsprout walks you step by step through the whole process and will give you powerful tools to start, grow, and monetize your podcast. Ready to get started? Click the link in the show notes to get our free step-by-step guide to starting your podcast today.
I love that you described it that way, because from a tech point of view, you know, the secret sauce of distributed ledgers is removing friction whenever possible, right? We have new intermediaries that might creep up, but hopefully they won't be rent-seeking, that they are additive and they're actually building in the space, right? Rather than extracting value. But it's interesting that what you are describing is serving as a bridge, because developing in isolation policy that's going to have these broad-reaching implications, or on the tech side, you know, devs having their heads down and just building, and then we'll figure out the policy later. No, there's this bridge that needs to happen in order for both to coexist in a way that makes the tech better and makes the policy better, right?
Yep. And I think that my push to be that bridge comes from my prior work in translation. So I used to be a German and Russian translator, and I love taking a set of data, translating into something else that is able to be read or understood by another population. And there haven't been that many people that can do that in the tech policy realm. I see it getting more and more popular, but before, starting out in 2018, there really weren't many people that I could look up to and see that they were doing that work of translating. What are the devs doing to what are the policymakers and regulators doing?
As you engage with policymakers on the Hill, for example, have you found through your work that regulators, policymakers are actually better able to have the conversation than a few years back?
Yeah, I would definitely say that the education has definitely grown. And I think it's a combination of a couple of different factors. I think one being the incredible boom that we had in the space post 2018, after the kind of last crypto winter, was when a lot of eyes were back on the space, and that helped kind of usher in more people to talk about, okay, so explain to me what the use cases for Web3 are, what the use cases for smart contracts are, or blockchain, right? And this helped launch more conversations, at least here, not only in DC, but in other kind of informal industry spaces that I've been a part of. So that's been the kind of the main factor. In addition to that, I think it's also been more of, I want to say, is I think a bit of a need to be more technologically forward. One of my good colleagues worked on getting the Tech Congress initiative up and running, which was partially needed due to the fact that there weren't a lot of technologically savvy spaces within the Hill. And I think this whole era of wanting to be more tech forward has made these conversations and, you know, trying to tease out what will Web3 mean for the United States, or what will AI mean for the future of work. So
absolutely. Well, tell us, because that's a perfect segue into where we're going. But final question, just about background and context. Talk to the listeners about what the Decentralized Future Council is, what it, its call to arms is in terms of the focus as a matter of policy and policy initiatives.
Definitely. So the Decentralized Future Council is a collective of like-minded public interest technologists, such as myself, that go in and talk to the public and policymakers about the opportunities within the Web3 ecosystem. We don't talk a lot about cryptocurrency because our focus is on building out what are some social impact use cases for Web3 and articulating that through webinars and fireside chats, podcasts, and community-related events.
Excellent, excellent. So when you are engaging the community and certainly policymakers, how do you approach this topic of the intersection of, or let me get at it this way, focusing on the use cases that give people a reason to lean in as opposed to run away in the other direction, right? I know people sometimes, if they start looking under the hood with technology, people's eyes glaze over. I would sit there and say, tell me more, but most people will not. I suspect that you would say, tell me more as well. Yes. You had a whole thing around smart contracts, so I see you. But how do you talk to the average person and then also those in positions of power about how policy should normatively develop in order to create the type of Web3 space that all can actually participate in?
Definitely. So as someone who really likes to break things down to its smallest component, smallest piece, I first go back to this idea of having a shared trust within a system. And from that, I begin to bring about examples of other emerging technologies, actually, because I also have this academic background that I can't seem to let go of. So I talk about how there is this natural inclination to be a little bit weary of emerging technology for a variety of reasons. This happened with the refrigeration systems. This happened with TV and automobiles. So placing that in context to where we are now with Web3 technologies helps set some people at ease by drawing these parallels between the tech that we use and love today to what we're trying to build out right now.
Right.
And in addition to that, because there has been such a spotlight on the cryptocurrency realm, I do like to decouple blockchain from cryptocurrency right off the bat and say that while these two are related in some aspects, they're not one and the same, and they have different use cases and different ways in which people can interact with them, right?
Right. And
I think those two ways in which I build that conversation help add some calm to the conversations that take place. And I believe that people are able to have a little bit more open-mindedness when I begin to talk about, I would say, I like to tell them as the non-sexy use cases of blockchain, such as land titling grants or supply chain, things that we don't really hear that much about in the media, but are very real ways in which we can construct a better, more efficient means of conducting our socioeconomic environment.
That's a really important way to approach the topic and kind of demystify and reduce the jargon and that resistance, right? The barriers to entry, so that you can at least have the conversation. So often, and I say this often on this show, we have this echo chamber of all crypto all the time, no crypto at any time, right? No. And then people pulling you based upon their own vested interest in one direction or another. As an educator, And I can tell in you as a lifelong learner, and one who's deeply committed to research and historical context in order to better understand the future. It's just important to be able to be conversant in this space. We're already here. And if we want to ensure that folks who were left behind in the dot-com boom and bust, and at every iteration and acceleration in the development of technology, which is happening far more quickly in our time, when I think of my parents' generation or my grandparents' generation, things are just at this accelerated pace. It's all hands on deck in terms of understanding and appreciating. So, and for our next topic, that we aren't replicating in this build of the next iteration of the internet. Everything is so siloed and centralized now. Talk to us about some of the pitfalls and the failures of Web 2 in order for us to better understand the promises and the opportunities and the use cases that we can talk about with DWeb.
Yeah, definitely. So this is one of the topics that I really enjoy talking to, especially with undergraduate and graduate audiences that are in the tech policy realm. So there are, I would say, three main pillars that we still need to dismantle to get to the part of the decentralized web that we are envisioning for our future. The first is this idea of the theory of neutrality, of technological neutrality. I think that there is still this idea of that is attached to many of the projects that I see in this space. And for those that may not be as familiar with it, the theory of technological neutrality is that tools can either be good or bad. It's in how you use them, right? So if I were to take a hammer to build a house, I'm using that tool for good. I take that hammer as a melee weapon, that's a use for bad, right?
Right.
And we're still applying this technological theory of neutrality to a lot of emerging tech, from AI to Web3 and crypto. And there needs to be a greater conversation on how we can be more inclusive in the design and the implementation of these technological tools that we are building before we can begin to realize the parts of the decentralized web that we want to be in. But outside of the design and implementation, we still have to combat the overwhelming culture of meritocracy.
You are listening to the Tech Intersect podcast with Professor Tanya M. Evans. Powered by Advantage Evans.
The last one really comes into play in terms of having all people working on technology. It can't just be engineers and developers. It has to be the artists, the policymakers, the regulators, the lawyers, attorneys. It has to be everyone contributing. I think that these three tenets really silo the tech space and make it a really hard space to navigate in. And in terms of creating spaces for the decentralized web to actually flourish, those dismantling those three is no easy feat, right?
Right.
It's going to take a combination of social change, reform, legislation, building around creating incentive models for companies to want to act in a way that benefits everyone.
Right.
And a general understanding of what technology is being used for and how we can better understand the implications of the use of said technology in various contexts. So it's a multi-pronged scenario that we're faced with, but I still have a lot of hope that we can actually break down a lot of those barriers to get to where we want to go.
If you're an engineer or a scientist, you love Formula One, you love cycling, you love learning about how new technologies are changing the world around us, then I thought you may want to listen into my new podcast, the Neil Ashton Podcast. We talk to leading engineers and scientists from around the world, hear about their life stories, hear about new technologies, and hopefully educate you and give you a better sense of how key things like machine learning, artificial intelligence, supercomputing are changing the world around us. If that sounds like it's something you might like, you should come and have a listen.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting time in history where we have a little space there where people, for a host of reasons, regardless of political affiliation, have had to rely on each other and are really focusing now. And I think of certainly millennials, but even more Gen Z, really understanding that this hyper competitive model is going to lead to the death, destruction, and mayhem of this earth. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I just look outside, and we look at this space during the pandemic, and we look at natural disasters. We look at things that this idea of pulling oneself up by his, her, their bootstraps and just doing it all on your own is inconsistent with nature.
Yep.
And it is not sustainable. And it spills over into every aspect of, particularly when you think of building anything new, I think of open source software. I think of patent pools in order to protect the development of technology. All of those things are critically important to get those layer one solutions functioning in a way that provides interoperability and opportunity. And it's interesting that we're doing this specifically with technology, but it is necessarily impacted by the rules, the regulations, the laws, the stakeholders involved in collaborating rather than competing. The competitive model is just falling; it's imploding at this point. Do you see that as well?
Yes, definitely. I am one of the cuspers. I'm not squarely millennial, I'm not squarely Gen Z, and I keep seeing the competitive model fall apart over and over again. And I think it's going to take people that see it and people that are in my generation to say, hey, let's fix some things here. It doesn't have to work like this. There are other ways in which we can construct a more equitable and just way to live. So I think it will take time. I think that's the hard push and pull with being in tech policy, that tech moves so fast, and so it's easy to iterate. In policy, it's a more slow moving process that, while it does have an iterative process, it's leagues behind the development in the tech space. So this will always be something that we will have to contend with.
It seems that this point is particularly well made when I think of policies and legislation in the privacy space. And I often hear people talking about privacy. I believe I teach information privacy in addition to blockchain and the law and some other courses. So I definitely get it. Every time I teach that semester, I just want to put on a tinfoil hat and curl up in a ball. It's like, it's too late for me. Save yourselves. But I won't bore you all with my conspiracy theories in that regard. Privacy is so incredibly important. And when I think about a technology that for most blockchains and coins and tokens that are permissionless and public facing, that's, that's a feature, not a bug. With that comes a lot of concerns around financial privacy and when I think of some of the best use cases, perhaps as a matter of identity and healthcare, but obviously it's screaming, but what about privacy? On one hand, I feel like you can code, there's a code for that, but we're constantly tweaking software and laws aren't as changing as fast, but they change. And this is a big question and we can just kind of take it bites at a time. So let's start here. Where does privacy fit in the conversation as a matter of inclusion in Web3? Let's start there.
Yeah, I think this is particularly interesting because I began, after doing some research on the space, while I was at the William and Mary Blockchain Lab, I got really invested in the privacy implications of having a transparent ledger.
Right.
On first glance, my first thought was, oh wow, that sounds terrific. It's transparent. It makes it auditable in some regard. You can see where it's going. That's what we need. But the more I looked into it and researched, I got this nagging sensation that there weren't enough privacy considerations.
Mm-hmm.
And that led me to where I am today, working within the privacy space within the Web3, the larger Web3 space. And I still think that it's a very small space to begin with, a lot smaller than I want it to be. Just to throw anecdotal evidence out there, a lot of the people that I talk to that interact with the Web3 space aren't super knowledgeable about the potential privacy implications of having a transparent ledger. And they kind of shrug it off, which I believe really harkens back to the lack of privacy education that we have
Absolutely.
In the US. We don't have it for a variety of reasons, but there are very little communities that are making enough noise about the privacy implications in Web3.
I've spent a lot of time thinking about it without a lot of solutions, admittedly, to be sure. Some of it is about education, but I wonder how much of the space has already been seeded and by let go because of the opt-in culture of free applications. I feel like that is its own education in click here because I want this in the short term, and we both know if you're not paying for something, then you are the product. Welcome. Not gonna name drop any Facebook. I'm not gonna name drop here because that would be inappropriate for future sponsors. But the idea of so much of the hyper surveillance that we're all just accustomed to makes it very, very challenging. And then the very real concerns in this world of cyber crime and the high level espionage, all of, when I think of money and money laundering and anti-money laundering, know your customer rules, it just is what it is. And this technology is innovating and disrupting spaces that are already heavily regulated. We start with finances and go to other spaces. But I always bring it back in my own teaching and working with my own students, both at the law school and also at Advantage Evans Academy. If I hand you a $10 bill, there's no record of that. The easiest way to know something about a person is to know how their money moves.
Yeah. Yep.
right? Don't talk to their family, don't talk to their friends, look at their bank account. And the privacy around that, the countervailing issues, and I turn the mic back over to you for your thoughts, closing thoughts on this topic, and I have one last thing to ask you about, but just how do we right size the conversation by at least acknowledging the dangers in the world, but offsetting that with the importance of financial and other types of privacy?
Yeah, I want to go back to something that I think is crucial to understanding why a lot of Americans don't think about privacy. And I think it does have to do something with privilege. And we don't tease that out enough. There is this prevailing notion that, well, I have nothing to hide. You can go through my statements if you want.
Right.
I get that a lot, but people tend to not recognize that as a privilege because there are tons of communities here in the US that don't have the privilege of moving through space with little regard to hypersurveillance. Right? And with that, I think that that's a cultural reason why there haven't been more conversations around privacy and Web3. And that is one of the levers that creates this kind of stagnation around privacy legislation. Although I will say I would be remiss if I did not mention the American Data Privacy and Protection Act that is being worked on as we speak, which is a really great first step, but it's still not where we should be in the year 2022.
Right.
So in order to get to a space where we can have accountability for people that do engage in money laundering and the financial crimes of the space, we need to help the least privileged first, because that's kind of one of the first rules of policy and community building is you have to help the least privileged first. That's just it. That's how you're going to get momentum and get more forward-moving measures that can benefit all people. But that's an approach that we, at least I have not seen as of late.
Very well said. When you think about all the work that we have to do to create this utopia, this the decentralized utopia. Anything, you mentioned one just now, but pieces of legislation working their way through now that you think listeners should keep an ear and an eye out for, things that you're encouraged about? What should be on folks' radar when we think about legislation in this area?
Yeah, I am fascinated by the American Data Privacy and Protection Act. I think that is probably one of the biggest pieces of legislation that I have got my eyes and ears tuned into. And I think for anyone who is interested in what that will look like in the future, I highly recommend looking at that. And in addition to that, I kind of like to give the advice of looking at what's happening in your state, what's happening locally, because I think even then it's still very fractured as to what's happening at the state level versus what's happening at the federal level. I was born and raised in Virginia, so what's happening in Virginia is very interesting to me. There are a lot of, I would say, more crypto forward policymakers in Virginia than in other areas, and seeing what's being moved forward there is fascinating. It's really interesting to see which states will have the capacity to formulate various regulatory sandboxes around Web3 and crypto and blockchain, and those which that may not have the capacity to do that.
I think that's great, and it's a great reminder. So much of my focus over several episodes has been at the federal level, but seeing that all politics are local,
Yes.
particularly in this season, and this is actually a really great time as folks are starting to consider how to vote as November. During our conversation here, we're talking in October of 2022. So elections are right around the corner. This is a great time if you've never taken a moment to see what's going on in your area. We have some very exciting things going on in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania as well, too. And so I think I will link that particular episode in these show notes, as well as some of the information that you've talked about as well. Our time flew. Very much enjoyed this conversation, and I'm quite sure that listeners did and will continue as well. In fact, tell listeners how they can learn more about you, the work that the council is doing as well.
For folks that want to stay engaged with the Decentralized Future Council, we just relaunched our website. You can follow our updates, what we're writing about, any events that are in the area. It's at decentralizedfuturecouncil.org, and happy to link that. In terms of me personally, I don't have social media, but you...
You're a privacy nerd, so I totally get that. It's too late for me again, so save yourself. That's amazing.
So I do have a public LinkedIn that
Excellent.
People can contact me through, and that's at Gabrielle Hibbert. But beyond that,
You gotta know me to know me.
You gotta know me.
I love it. That is the best advice that folks can take away. You gotta know me to know me, and someday we'll be represented by awesome tokens and web addresses, and you won't have to know a thing about me.
Yes.
And it'll be a happier place, at least for me. And then I can take off my tinfoil hat and come outside because, I hear it's nice outside. All right. Gabrielle Hibbert, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm so happy that we're connected and there's so much synergy in the work that we're doing and our interests. So we will definitely stay in touch. And thank you for now being a family member to Tech Intersect.
Yes, thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I could talk for another 2 hours.
Awesome. All right, well, I'm gonna have to have an after show. It'll be like Bravo. We'll have an after show. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to the Tech Intersect podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you love it, please tell the world. If not, go ahead and tell me. And in either case, drop a comment or ping me on social media at IPProfEvans with the hashtag Tech Intersect. And finally, a quick reminder on digital safety. There are a lot of scammers out there impersonating me and others, and I need your help. Now hear this, and remember, I will never slide into your DMs to say peace and blessings or hey, and I will never reach out to solicit your time or your money on social media like ever. I'm not a trader. I am an educator and an attorney licensed in 4 states. Thank you very much. I'm here to inform, inspire, and empower. No cap, and definitely no Forex. So be careful, make good choices, and remember, I developed an entire free masterclass about the topic of digital safety in the crypto space. So check out secureyourcryptobag.com for more information. That's secureyourcryptobag.com. All right, that's all for this episode. Until next time, continue to shine.